Hi, Dr. Martin. Today I'm going to be talking to you about my conflict assessment between Kim Kardashian and Kourtney Kardashian, which obviously you know these two very famous celebrity sisters. Just want to make sure this is recording. So I am going to give a quick relational background, which again, I'm sure you already know all this information, but I do think it's very relevant. Um, Seeing as these two sisters have high interdependency on each other in both a financial aspect because they have had, so much shared work over the years, as well as, overall family dynamic. They're a close family. They have a lot of siblings and nieces and nephews. They, live in the same city, travel together. Their kids all hang out. So I just want to quickly run through some of these relational aspects of their sister dynamic. So they are two sisters. They come from a large blended family. They have four other siblings, so six siblings total. Kourtney, on the right, is the oldest of all the siblings. However, Kim is actually only 18 months younger than Kourtney. So, growing up, the two were very close in age. They shared everything from clothes to friend groups. They had a very close bond growing up, but it's often been shown over the course of, the many seasons of Keeping Up with the Kardashians. The two look back and reflect on actually how much they used to fight growing up. Which brings me to my last point over here. They've always sort of had this love-hate relationship, which I think is very kind of unique to a sister dynamic. I have a sister. I think you mentioned that you have a sister as well. So, I'm not sure how you and your sister grew up. I know you have a brother and maybe one other sibling, but, me and my sister will go from laughing one minute to fighting the next. Growing up, we also, fought over the same stuff. I think in their dynamic specifically, once Chloe came along and then once their mom remarried and had Kendall and Kylie, I think that there was a lot of kind of fighting for attention amongst the siblings. I think specifically, though, between Kourtney and Kim, as they are the oldest. I think that there were aspects of jealousy growing up. So I think that sort of all plays into how we've watched them pretty much evolve into adults. This slide here is mainly emphasizing just how, deep and long standing their relationship as siblings go. So let's go to the next slide. So I wanted to quickly talk about the evolution of Keeping Up with the Kardashians because I think that is kind of the driving force around a lot of their family conflict and disputes because, they all work together. So Keeping Up with the Kardashians premiered in 2007. So this is when, Kim was rising to fame. She had that like sex tape scandal. She was following around Paris Hilton. She was kind of creating her career, and her career was taking off as a socialite in Hollywood. And so the show Keeping Up with the Kardashians kind of originally was revolved around Kim, which we see here on the left. We see her family in the background, all the siblings, and Kim's in the forefront, which I think is important as well because, later when we look at the conflict that I'm analyzing, it does sort of come from this root idea that Kim works the hardest, Kim, created everyone's careers and so on. But as her sisters kind of rose to fame as well, they began to step into the spotlight with Kim, especially as they matured and got older and, people became more interested in watching them. So then I think, the dynamic began to shift. I think, as much as Kim loves to be the main character or used to love to be the main character, I'm sure that shift began to cause a little friction. So the show ran for 20 seasons on the E network. Um, my face is covering, but I believe that says over the course of 14 years that Keeping Up with the Kardashians was on E. So, that's a big stretch of time. I don't have exactly how old Kim and Courtney were when the show started. I would say they were in their mid to late 20s. Um, but in 2022, the show moved over to Hulu and just became short for the Kardashians. And I believe they're on their seventh or eighth season. My face is covering what I wrote. But yeah, so the sisters as a whole, plus their mom, have been in business with each other for a long time. So, especially when we're looking at the three, full sisters, obviously Kendall and Kylie are half sisters. But Courtney, Khloe, and Kim, I think, also have a really close, special dynamic, um, beyond Kendall and Kylie. Of course, I think they're a very strong blended family. I think they all have a lot of love for each other, but I do think the three sisters, they had Dash, which was a clothing store that originated in New York and LA, or LA and New York. Um, and the three of them had a lot of spin-offs with each other, which we'll see in the next slide. So here's specifically Courtney and Kim. They were on Courtney and Kim Take Miami, Courtney and Kim Take New York. I believe Courtney and Khloe also had their own spinoffs. I believe they had like a Hamptons one and one other one. So as you can see, over the years, while Keeping Up with the Kardashians was being filmed, they also had their own like spin-offs and side ventures. So I mean, we're looking at 2007, almost 20 years of like a family business with each other. So things are sort of bound to get really complicated. Um, so I unfortunately can't play this video for you while you're in the recording. Well, I'm recording. So I am going to actually email you both of these clips, and they should start right where I want you to watch them, just for about like 60 seconds tops. I think you'll get the point of what I'm trying to show here. But this is season 15, which I believe is 2018 at this point. And this is when we start to see, Courtney really try to go her own way. At this point, her and Scott have separated. They're co-parenting as best they can. She is now dating Travis Barker at this point in time, and Kim and Khloe feel as though, Courtney, they can feel the distance growing between them and Courtney. And, I think Courtney at this point is sort of trying to like begin to set some boundaries around how much she wants to film the show, how much she wants to be sharing on the show. She becomes a little difficult in terms of like cooperating with the filming schedule, but of course they're all signed on to film for Keeping Up with the Kardashians, and they all profit off of the show. So I think this is when we start to see like things are kind of changing with Courtney. And I think that also ties in like family systems and communication, which I'm going to kind of talk about on the last slide. But, as I'm sure you all know, I think the Kardashian family is very, has high communication and high conformity. They're constantly always all talking about what's going on, what they think of who, and what the family's doing, kind of how they're moving through the world as a unit, their perception to the public eye, their brand image as a family. I think there's a lot of communication happening all the time, and we see that in the show. And then I also think there is this high level of pressure to conform to the family. And this is when we really start to see like Courtney kind of, verbally starting to say like that she wants to set boundaries and that she has different priorities in life. I think that's like a big thing for Courtney, is that she begins to sort of want to prioritize different things in life, where, you know, maybe Kim and Chloe still feel like still feel this pressure or commitment to the family show, or Courtney's kind of like, you know, lone wolf. I think she wants to do her own thing. And then in this video, which I'm sure you've seen this fight, this happened in season 18. So this is in 2020. So about 2 years later. Oh, I'm so sorry. Let me quickly go back. Oh, can I go back? I don't think it's going to let me go back. But in that previous video, we see them meeting with a family therapist. So I think that's one of the first times on the show where you see a therapist being brought in. So I'm kind of working like backwards a little bit, like, you know, this physical fight conflict between Kim and Courtney is really what I want to talk about, but it has been like a building conflict, and in terms of like intervention and kind of looking at, you know, attempted solutions, I think they did try to like address this 2 seasons earlier. So hopefully you can watch this video clip as well, so we can go on to the next slide. Okay, I think I might be going a little bit over time here. Sorry. Technical difficulties. I'm trying to figure this out. Okay, so for the conflict assessment summary, so here, you know, in the fight, once you watch it, you're going to see a lot of destructive communication and behavior. You know, we see a lot of Kim stirring the pot. We see a lot of criticism from Kim, but it's a little bit more like cool and calm and collected. You know, Kim is saying to Courtney, you know, oh, well, you know, you don't care about anything, you know, mom can't count on you to show up to work and this and that. And Courtney immediately becomes defensive because, you know, I think it's her identity that's sort of on the line, which we'll talk about with the trip goals. But yeah, you know, you see kind of Kim being Kim kind of like criticizes everyone. That's sort of like her thing. And Courtney immediately reacts with defensiveness and as well as contempt. You know, Kim's sort of like caught off guard and she starts laughing, and Courtney goes, you know, don't laugh like that. You look like a freak. You know, because I think Kim's like, oh crap, like Courtney's getting escalated. I do think that this whole conflict has an escalatory spiral over the years, and then also within this specific episode during season 18, the year's 2020. All throughout the episode, you sort of see tensions rising between Courtney and Kim, and you kind of see Chloe being involved as well. I think stonewalling happens a lot. I believe stonewalling sort of happened after this fight. It was said that filming did come to a halt after this kind of blowout physical fight. So I think stonewalling has been a thing in their family. You know, even in other episodes, you hear them say, oh, I haven't heard from Kim, or I haven't heard from Courtney in a while, or, oh, I'm not talking to so-and-so. You know, I think that is unfortunately a pattern that they do fall into. But a lot of contempt in this physical fight, and a lot of name calling, bad mouthing, global complaints. You know, like, you always have this narrative of me in your head, and you know, like Kim, I'm sure Kim was kind of throwing around some hateful things as well. It unfortunately, there's not a lot of like communication happening. It just immediately turns like explosive. So I think the trip goals at play here are, the topical goal is like, okay, you know, Chloe and Kim feel like Courtney doesn't pull her weight with how much she films and the filming schedule for Keeping Up with the Kardashians and her commitment to the show. But really what it comes down to is the relational goal and the identity goal between the sisters. I think both Kim and Courtney really hold weight in their identity. So when their identity, their name, their reputation is sort of being manipulated or told in a way that's not true to them, I think that is something that really lights both of these women up. I think that Courtney's emotions really get, really, she gets taken away by her emotions. I think she can be very hot headed. I think she was very hot headed when she was younger, where Kim is definitely more calm, cool, collected, definitely more calculating when it comes to her communication skills, which I think is a power that she has. I think Kim kind of knows how to say things to really cut but like maintain her composure, and I think that really aggravates Courtney, which you can just see throughout the seasons but also in this fight. I think relationally, I think Courtney just wants like emotional validation and respect from her sisters. I think also being the older sister plays into this as well. I feel like she has that like oldest sibling syndrome kind of. Where and I think relationally, I think maybe Kim feels like, okay, like I feel like you're not being loyal, I feel like you're not showing up and putting in the work like I am, like we're sisters, we're family, like you're kind of off always doing your own thing. So I think there's this relational the conflict is very relational, but I think the most that comes out for me when I look at this is like Courtney's identity. She's being, Kim and Chloe and kind of other members of the family are kind of like creating this narrative of Courtney, that she doesn't work or that she wants to do her own thing. And I think Courtney's identity is, she wants to be seen as someone who values her family and values her personal life and her freedom and her independence from her family. As well as, wanting to be like a present mother, wanting to be able to set boundaries. In the session with a therapist, back in 2018, she says, work is not my top priority. And then in the fight with Kim, when they get physical, she says, I work my ass off, but even if I didn't want to, and I just wanted to be a stay-at-home mom, that's okay. And then it kind of clips over to her in her individual interview on the show, saying, we don't have to all do things the same way. And that's kind of where I think the process goal comes in, because in Courtney's mind, she doesn't have to do things the way her family does. She doesn't have to work at the same standard as everyone else in her family. She wants to do things her own way. And I think Kim sort of being a ringleader, kind of being like the core foundation of like the Kardashian enterprise, I think that really rubs her the wrong way. I'll quickly touch upon the influence of the family systems and the communication pattern, which I believe I wrote down. Maybe I didn't write down. I think it's going to be in my paper though. So I'm going to go a little more into depth about that in my paper. But as I said in the beginning of the video, I think there is a lot of high conformity and high communication and a lot of pressure to all do things the same way. So I think when Courtney tries to set some boundaries and take space and kind of be independent, I think, it's frustrating for them. And I'm not saying Courtney is right. I think she, if she's going to be part of the show, and I'm sure there's legal things around filming that, I think she does need to be held accountable. Definitely we see collations and triangles all throughout the whole like series of the show, but also in both of these episode examples, the sisters are notorious for kind of creating triangles, sort of a 2 against 1, especially when it comes to Chloe, Kim, and Courtney. Back in the day, it was actually, I believe, Chloe and Courtney that sort of used to pin themselves against Kim. But here we really see Chloe and Kim kind of forming a bond, rely, uh, using each other to like kind of raise their power, which is what we talk about in class. Um, and, you know, especially when things are turbulent, I think they lean on each other for support and to kind of like, yeah, like kind of create more power over Courtney temporarily. But, once this blowout happens, you actually see Chloe kind of get in between them and she tries to be the mediator. I think Chloe also tries to be the mediator in general between Kim and Courtney because I think both of them can be very like strong willed. Okay, let's see. Okay, I'm going to wrap this up because I was having some technical difficulties, but we're good. So, to quickly run through some of the professional advice that I'm going to talk about in my final paper, I think Courtney and Kim really need to work on managing their emotions. Um, as we see in that blowout fight, we just see emotional flooding, which is ultimately caused by destructive communication that's happening as the fight begins to escalate. I think there's just so much negativity and contempt coming from one another that I think it just causes like the body to take over. I think Courtney sort of sees red in this situation, which I think Kim actually in one of her interviews after the blowout with Courtney, I think she also says verbatim that she saw red, which sort of caused them both to, begin to get physical with each other. So I think working on managing their emotions, which can be hard in family dynamics. I feel like, in business or sometimes even in, certain relationships, friendships, I think we sort of kind of can mask ourselves a little bit or have a little bit more control over our display of emotions. Whereas I feel like in family dynamics, because we feel so comfortable, we really can just let it fly. But I think they need to work on managing their emotions and also naming their emotions. Saying like, "Hey, like I'm just feeling pissed," or I'm just feeling so upset right now. I'm so mad." Like, kind of being able to name the emotion before it sort of takes over your actions. I think they need to really work on that. And I think we see in the previous clip with the therapist, we see Courtney crying and getting emotional. And, you can tell that Chloe is feeling upset. And, Kim kind of is sort of hard to read sometimes. But, I think when they have a mediator, they do a little bit better in terms of managing emotion. Next is implementing XYZ statements. I think that would be huge. So, I think by saying, Courtney could say, "Hey, like, um, okay, sorry. I had to pause for a second. So, Courtney can say, "Hey, Kim, like, when you sort of put me down in front of the cameras or in front of our family and talk about my work ethic while we're filming, it makes me feel whatever she's feeling. It makes her feel Z." So it could be, like you're coming for my identity, my integrity. It makes me feel disrespected as a sister and someone that, a coworker in business, as a friend. So I think the XYZ statements could be really important. Kim could say, you know, Courtney, when you drag your feet and complain, while we're trying to schedule time to film the show, it makes me feel like you're disinterested, in our shared business together, or that, you're kind of letting me down as a sister and not holding up your end of the bargain. I mean, obviously, the family and business relationship is very complicated. And, I think that they have hopefully worked on it. But I think like all throughout the whole series of Keeping Up with the Kardashians, you really don't see a lot of productive XYZ statements being used. You see a lot of like, "you always do this, you make me feel this," it's a lot of pointing the fingers. Whereas I think implementing XYZ statements as well as like I statements, like I feel this way because XYZ, could be helpful here. I think also clarifying their trip goals. Clearly, like the topic of the conflict that's building is, Courtney's commitment to the show and the filming schedule. But really, I think it comes down to the relationship and the identity. So, I think if they can kind of get on the same page and say, like, hey, like, our relationship is the most important thing at the end of the day. Like, we're family, we're sisters, we're best friends, like, that's the most important thing that we should be focusing on. And I think also, like, working out the process goals. I think, Kim can kind of stir the pot and Courtney can be very reactive. So I think by, again, kind of pulling in those XYZ statements, hopefully that can also play into like how they're going to like move forward with how they're going to deal with the conflict, like the process of it. Because, I think Courtney feels like she is kind of like attacked when like conflict arises. So I think the process is a big factor for the two sisters and the whole family. And then, the identity here, I think they both need to like name and clarify like, hey, like, within this conflict, I feel this. Like Courtney can say, I feel like in this conflict, like you're coming for my identity. You're kind of making me look bad on TV and kind of, coming after my work ethic and who I am as a mother and a person and a businesswoman. And then I think Kim also can say, hey, well, I'm feeling like my identity in this is that, I'm the one that kind of like carries the weight or whatever, whether that's true or not. I think kind of like naming and clarifying their goals would be helpful. And then lastly, just reconciliation and forgiveness. I think throughout the series, you see them, the sisters, trying to reconcile and forgiving each other, but often, the whole thing about forgiveness is granting interpersonal clemency. So, kind of like being able to wipe the slate clean and start fresh and really forgiving someone. I think they often don't do that. As sisters, I think they hold long grudges. Clearly, we see this conflict stretch out over 2 years from 2018 to 2020. So clearly, there's not a lot of like true reconciliation happening. I think they meet up to have their like sister talks on camera. I'm sure that they have moments off camera as well, but it really seems like they're not really like holding space for each other to truly reconcile the situation. And this sort of kind of also slightly ties into like working on their emotional intelligence. I think they sort of operate, obviously being high profile celebrities and a famous family. I think they sort of like operate in a vacuum, and I think everything is sort of like one big silo. So I think like they don't have the greatest self-awareness and emotional intelligence. I think Chloe does. I think she tries. I think Chloe is probably the most empathetic of the sisters. But I really think that both Kim and Courtney don't have a lot of empathy for each other. So I think that would be something that could really help the two of them specifically. Obviously, family and business relationships are hard enough separately, but I think together they can really just sort of create a recipe for disaster. So hopefully, I think, we sort of see it in the newer seasons that, there have been more clear boundaries drawn. And I think that they've sort of worked out the issues around like filming for the show and setting boundaries. So yeah, I'm going to go further into this in my paper and my conflict assessment. So hopefully this made sense. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you soon. Bye.